In this tutorial I'm going to talk about the terrain and how to deal with some of the special features that we encounter when using Assetto Corsa's multi-layer shader. So here I've brought in a Google image landscape, which is some snow-capped mountains and a nice green valley in the middle. All well and good until you actually load it up and it has this greenish tinge and the mountains are looking a little bit chunky too. Before we address the greenish tinge, let's just look at the tool that we can use to break the terrain here. So this is the first tool I developed until I realized that my painting tool was pretty good for breaking down. So there's painting when you're using the non-Assetto multi-layer method, when you're using vertex blending. When you reduce this, it'll make smaller triangles. It has to make smaller triangles in order to make the blending good. But with texture painting, we're just painting that color into a texture underlying so that the triangles don't have to break down. So you need to revert back to this tool, which will take whatever triangle you click on first, and then any surrounding triangles that match it for size you can break down. You can then come in here and we'll break it down even further. So if I wanted to break this again and get more detail in this section, you can do that and go away to Google and grab the information and bring it back. So it's a little bit cumbersome, but it will work, and I will try and work on a paint tool that works much more like the vertex blending paint tool does for breaking the triangles, because it's pretty cool. Getting back to the greenish tinge now, what's going on here is that we're loading in the Google image, which if we look at the materials and click on here and go to the textures and we click on edit, we will see that it's actually looking quite good. It's very similar to what we saw when looking at the first image. So that side of things is actually working okay, but what the shader is doing is, if I were to add a layer on top of this and change that layer to be multiply and then paint in a greenish texture onto there, and yeah, if I were to do that, then everything gets that greenish tinge to it. So that's not the result we're looking for, and so what we'll do is we'll just exit out of that and we'll switch back and we'll go to the grass here, and let's just make sure we've got that painted on that top section there. We'll look at that icy section with grass on it. I don't know whether to call it grass or something else, but it's very much looking like grass there where we should have ice. When an RTB first creates this, it doesn't really know what's ice, what's grass, what's trees, what's rock, so it's kind of taking a really bad guess at what that might be. And when it's got one of these 4 different textures to put on it, 3 of which are grass and 1 is sand, it's never going to get it right here. So starting with I hope to have an alpine version of a theme here eventually, that would help because our starting materials would be more suited to this sort of terrain. Failing that for the moment, what we can do is we can edit that grass material, and I'll open up a file I had. Oops, not that one. Look at my desktop, go to Snow, load that up. Just copy that over the top here very roughly and do a new layer and export that back out over the grass DDS. Now when we come back here, we find that the material's loaded up into there, and all of that is looking far better than where I haven't painted. In fact, a lot of it's looking better already, because even this is a mixture of these 4 different colors. So if I tell it definitely just use this whiteness over this area, then you see that color starts coming out. I should crank the strength up there So we can do this a little bit more quickly. I'm just doing it very roughly. So that starts to bring the color back to what you would expect to see. That's well and good, but you'd probably want to retain one of the grass colors, and it will take a bit of effort and a bit of detail to do. And you could, in theory, simply go to the materials here, go to your textures for that, look at the mask, because this is the file that we're editing when we're using these 4 different colors, and each of these are put into one of the channels of the mask. You can read more about that in the Assetto Corsa forums, and you could edit that mask, and it's very tricky to see through here, but you could paint onto this and it would edit the underlying stuff too if you don't want to do it through the editor here. Here's not too bad though. You can actually just exit out of that. You could just get the grass and come down to these grassy areas, and remember these big blotchy areas here are actually shadows, so you're going to want trees and objects here eventually in future versions of RTB. Then we're going to have objects that you'll be putting all around here, so I wouldn't be too worried about the graininess of that. And certainly with the right colours, you would certainly have things looking better. And just one last thing I'll show is that we could edit grass 2 here, and the other thing that seems to help at this point in time is to make that brighter. You can adjust this slightly one way or the other, make it brighter but still make it obviously grass. Export that in. I'll shut that down, and we'll jump and shut that down. We'll load up that grass, and we'll paint that down here. Paint that down here. You can see that coming through. It's not making much of a difference because it was already blended with some nice colours. So yeah, that hopefully explains why you're getting a green tinge to a lot of your landscapes. If you wanted to get rid of it completely, you could also edit materials. Let's do it with the grass 3 this time. You could, in theory, just the quickest way to do this is probably create a white, entirely white texture. Keep them slowing down. There we go. And we export that out. I would obviously make it a lot smaller. You don't need 1024 white texture. And get rid of that. And everything's becoming brighter already. Wherever you wanted just the underlying texture to come through, you could just use that. Obviously though, when I do that, I get rid of the finer detail that is put over it. So if you're using a grass, you'll get the finer detail come through. I'll crank that up a bit, so it's obviously, there you go, starting to come through. The dark patches there are obviously shadows. You could also edit that underlying texture there and have just the grass coming through. That's about all I've got to say on this topic for the matter. I hope that helps. Thanks for watching.